Okay, guys, so this is our last little mini unit before the Christmas break. Woohoo! This is over. Why did it start? Not at the front. Grr. So it's about serial killers. Okay, so it's a mini unit about serial killers. You should have got that hint yesterday watching the video over two types of serial killers: disorganized versus organized. It's mostly going to focus on forensic psychology. We're going to throw in some like other types of evidence that maybe gets used to catch the serial killer that we've talked about already or might talk about in the future. But mostly this focuses on how to use criminal profiling, so forensic psychology, to catch a serial killer. So the reason why that is important in this unit is because when we have a normal homicide, okay, so a regular homicide that happens, usually there is some pretty clear suspects. You have some people that had a motive to kill that person, or a lot of times it is people, their spouse, their family member, even like more rare, but like there's a mass, like a robber that's in the area and he's robbed several houses and he happens to shoot one of you, walk in on them or something. But there's usually some kind of motive that you can link those motives, find the suspects, and then find something at the crime scene to link to your suspect. And then, you dig deeper and deeper till you solve the case. But in a serial killer case, most of the time, most of their victims are random. So when you come across that crime scene, you find no motive, you find no suspects, you have no leads. So when you have no leads, like, what do you do? How do you start when you have no leads? Now, in today's age, serial killers, the number of serial killers has went down a lot because we do, I think, catch them before they become serial killers. With our fingerprint systems are so much faster than leaving their DNA behind. And now we can actually test it and we can keep their DNA on file and in databases. Whereas back in the 70s, 80s, which was when we had the highest number of serial killers, we hadn't even discovered DNA yet. So if you didn't know, we'll learn this throughout this unit. Most serial killers are sexual predators as well. They are also rapists. So a lot of times they would leave their DNA at the scene. But in those time frames, we didn't know how to test for DNA. So it gave us not a lot of help. Sometimes you could get blood type from it if it was later in the 80s or early 90s. But blood type is still pretty circumstantial because so many of us have the same blood types. So where do you begin when you are back in those time frames, the 70s, 80s, or and early 90s, when we had such limited capacity of technology? Okay, so that's when most of serial killers were. I think in today's time frame, I'm not saying that you couldn't have a serial killer in today's time frame, but it'd be a lot harder because we have way better technology now. Okay. All right, so that is what we are starting with. We're going to start with just some interesting charts to kind of get us going, to get us thinking about this unit. I also want to make a quick disclaimer. I think I wrote it at the top of your assignment, but if this is ever too much, this is not like a normal homicide that we've heard of in the past. It's not one person died or a man kills his family, which are terrible, awful cases. But this is a person with some kind of psychosis. They have something wrong with their brain. You're not going to go off and do these terrible things to people unless there is something not working the way it needed to have just no empathy for any person. So the things that happen in these cases can be so much more dark. Okay. So I'm going to try to, kind of glide over it a little bit here and there, but I also don't want to sugarcoat it to a degree that you don't understand the importance of criminal profiling, because we don't want these people killing any more people. And same thing, if you when we get to the serial killer project on Thursday and Friday, you get to pick a killer. If you're going to need me to help direct you to pick a killer that is not a rapist, like you don't want to read about rape, if you don't want to read about torture, if you don't want to read about child murder, that kind of thing, then please let me know. Like, I am perfectly happy to point y'all in directions that are going to be a lighter topic. I mean, nothing's gonna be light. It's serial killers, but lighter than the ones that are super dark. Okay. So make sure you send me an email or something if you need to. Okay, let's begin. So in this chart right here, it says there in 44 states in DC, there are people that are locked up with serious mental illness. There are more people locked up with a serious mental illness than any state psychiatric hospitals. What they're saying is there was a whole big program, I forget which year, I think it was the 70s, where the psychiatric hospitals shut down. Like we just had a shift in our government funding. A lot of the psychiatric hospitals were shut down, and a lot of those people ended up going to prison instead. So what this is saying, in all these 44 states, there were more people that were locked up that they knew had a serious mental illness. Like they were already diagnosed before they were imprisoned, and now they're in prison with that serious illness, mental illness. And there's like way less than psychiatric hospitals. So it's just kind of pointing towards this, something to ponder. Serial killers are obviously awful. Like it's just so awful what they do. But most of them do have a serious mental illness. So it's like that is something to think about. If we had caught it earlier, most of the time these mental illnesses start actually at y'all's age, a little bit younger than y'all. So earlier teenage years is usually where you can start seeing this beginning. And if parents, if grandparents, if teachers, if all of us notice those earlier traits and there was something to help them, it's hard to say if they could have changed. And I don't know. I mean, kind of like that's an opinion-based question at the moment, but they have done some studies on some kids that they already knew were a psychopath, like young children that were already doing very scary things. And they put those children into some really extreme therapy, not hurting therapy, but just like a lot of therapy. And they ended up becoming completely normal, living their life without even need of therapy anymore, kind of people. And most of the time those kids had suffered severe abuse. So if those children had not gotten the therapy, like what would have happened to them? And what could have happened to some of these serial killers if we had caught it earlier? It's a thought to think about when we have so many in prison that have these illnesses. Roughly 1 in 3 prison inmates suffer from a serious mental illness, 1 in 3. Many prisoners report prior mental illness before they were imprisoned. So saying like they already were diagnosed, they were already taking medication for it. They'd already had overnight stays in mental hospitals. So just a lot of people that are in prison are dealing with these mental illnesses. Now, some of them are just anxiety or depression. Not that that's not a lot, but I wouldn't say that would be a usual cause of causing someone to murder. Whereas having schizophrenia or a post-traumatic stress disorder, like those would be more common to cause you to do more violent actions. And not always. Like if you know someone who's a schizophrenic, like there are people who manage that disease. Okay. So now looking at this chart, okay, so this is showing you map of United States. 10 plus means like they have 10 plus murders per 100,000 people happening pretty often. Okay, so they're just kind of looking at, here's the really red areas, Mexico, Louisiana, our Bahamas, Puerto Rico. Those are really high, but then right below it is Mississippi. And then all these orangier states, which is including Texas, are all mid to high areas of violent crime. So if we go to the next slide, it just kind of reiterates that, kind of flowing through, showing you the places that are more or less safe by the decades. So right now, closer down, we get more red. I don't know why I won't just freeze. There we go. In 2013, Texas is pretty red. Now, here's a charts just based on actual serial killers. We're going to talk about like what defines a serial killer in just a second. But if we're looking at these trends, so like I said, the highest that we caught serial killers was the 70s and the 80s, and then into the 90s. So 70s, 80s, 90s, that was the highest. And then when we hit the 2000s, major drop off, and then it stayed fairly steady, but it kind of keeps getting less. We definitely are seeing a drop off of serial killers. Now, there's a lot of things you could think about that. Like this has sparked some discussions of why do we think that is? A lot of reasons. I'm going to mention some of those in a second, so I'll hold off. But there's also probably one of the biggest things is just that we're probably more likely to catch them now. So either they aren't becoming serial killers because they know they'll be caught, or we catch them when they've only killed one person. So then they're not a serial killer. All right. So general statistics, serial murder in the United States. So serial murders by race, this is just so you know. Um, Biggest chunk is definitely white males, actually, but white people. Next would be African American, so black, and then Hispanic, and then other. So any other race that we have in this country. Now, when you're thinking about, like, obviously white people are way higher. But for our actual breakdown in the country, our country has like 70% white people and only 13.3% African American. So actually, African Americans kind of high for serial murders. I'd be interested to know where they got these statistics to, like, if they were counting gang violence, because gang violence would be more than one murder, like a serial killer. But I don't really think of that as a serial killer. Then for serial murders by gender, very predominantly male. Okay, so very, very much so predominantly male. There are some female serial killers, but very few. Now, broad motives by serial killers. So this is most of them because they like it. So most of the time, like we're not talking about people with motives here, like not real motives. We're talking about people that have issues that just wanted to murder someone. That's why they're so much harder to catch, because there isn't a motive. Like I don't know how to catch a person that's just killing cuz. So most of them for the enjoyment. The next big part is financial gain. That does happen. There's definitely been some like hitmen, which is that a serial killer? Being to the fact that they still enjoy it and continue to do it because they want to, I would still count that as a serial killer. A lot of the female serial killers that we have were for financial gain. Like they would continually marry people and just kept killing their husbands and then would take the money from it. That was quite a few of the serial killers that were women. So that's for financial gain. And then anger, multiple motives, so had different things. Gang activity, which I don't really count, but I guess is technically a serial killer. Hallucinations, cult, like this, all that kind of weirder stuff down here. And then serial killers, number of kills. So this is just on average. Having 2 kills can still be considered a serial killer, depending on which rule you're using. 3, having 4, having 5, or having more than 5. So the majority of the ones that we'll talk about have more than 5 people that they've killed. Now, this chart here is just to help you understand the chart that's next, okay, to understand the map that's next. So for world population percentages for comparisons of the United States, I just wanted you to know that the United States only accounts for 4.3% of the world's population. So this is everybody else's population, okay? So everybody else's population, our little bitty population of the entire world, right? Now, when we look at our next chart, it breaks it down by country of serial killers, okay? So this is number of serial killers by decade in each of these countries. And United States is not only higher, it's like by far higher. Look at 1980. Oh my gosh. 680. No one else even gets to 50. They don't get to 50. We have 680 in 1980 and then 572. So like something happened. Like over here, like theirs are pretty low and ours are still higher. But then like right here in the 60s, we're like, what? And then we dropped back off. But like there was something wrong from the 60s to the 90s in this country. That's crazy. That really is. So just perspective. We have way less people overall out of the whole population, way less people. And yet all the serial killers coming from us. Now, I will say, I would think this data would be a little skewed because I don't think that in lower income, lower economic nations, I don't think they're really looking for the serial killers as much as we are, you know? So, I mean, I feel like they'd be going under the radar. So that could certainly be true for those low income population places. Are they searching for serial killers? I doubt they would have as much resources to do that. So that data could certainly be skewed, but this isn't comparing us to those countries. This is comparing us to countries like us for the most part. Canada, Japan, UK is England. So Italy, like those are countries that we're similar to for the most part. We do have more people than some of these places for sure, but still, it's still a lot. So I mean, definitely some skewed data, but still United States by far wins for having the most number of serial killers, which I'm not sure that's a great thing to win. All right, so I said I was going to say what was the decrease? Like, why did we have a decrease in the United States? So why do we have that drop off after the 1980s or really 1990s? Again, I think it's technology. You can't really do insurance fraud anywhere near as easily as it used to be. So killing people for money just doesn't really work. Killing multiple patients is not likely to go unnoticed. So there was a lot of serial killers that killed their patients. So like doctors, nurses, that kind of killers. There were quite a lot of those for a while, and that just we keep up with our data better now. So like if that nurse was fired from one place and then moved to another place, that her data would travel to her new place. So people wouldn't keep hiring a nurse that had a lot of deaths. Longer prison sentences keep potential serial killers in prison. We keep people in prison longer now. I know that a lot of people say that we don't keep people in prison long enough. We keep them in way longer than we used to. Certainly for like murder charges, like we were just letting people out. If you look at other countries, some of their highest sentence, they could murder 25 little girls in a brutal, awful way in South America. I forget which country, but probably several of the countries down there. And their highest thing they could give him was 7 years. Murdering. So one of the guys, it was like they thought he was hundreds of little girls he murdered. And they gave him 7 years. Because that was the highest thing they could give him. You're like, so we have people in prison a lot longer here. Law enforcement efforts catch single murder more quickly. So if we have better law enforcement, more surveillance, and better efforts, we have DNA now. We have all these better technology that all enhances our ability to catch them faster before they actually become a serial killer. Efforts on terrorism reduce the FBI's ability to link serial murders. Now that means that maybe we still have serial killers, but the efforts on terrorism, we block our information a lot. People can't cross their data as well. You have to go through all these loops before people will let you trade data in cases. So then maybe they're missing some links and then they're not realizing it's a serial killer. I hope that's not true. That's a possibility. And then fewer available victims. So why are there fewer available victims? These kind of things were very popular in the 70s and 80s. Hitchhiking. Everyone I know that's like my mom's age, they were just like, I hitchhiked everywhere. I didn't have a car. I just put your thumb out and let's go. That's not common anymore. Please don't do it. Okay. Especially if you are a girl, please don't. And boys shouldn't do it either. There are a lot of boys that are murdered. But if you were a smaller person, the person who is picking you up, please don't get in their car. Okay. Just don't do that. Offering rides, accepting or offering to get in. We're not nice like that anymore. Disabled motorists, we don't pull over and help people anymore. But sadly, because people would pull over to help the person and the person you were helping was a murderer and that was their way to catch you. Free range kid behavior, kids just going off, riding their bicycles, playing with their friends, we don't really let kids do that as much anymore. I don't know about your life, maybe your parents did, but I know where I live in suburbia. Okay. I don't let my kid go anywhere. He does this for the first time ever. He's allowed to walk from school, but he walks with a whole group of children from everyone leaving at school at that time. And my husband waits for him right up, he can see him from the school. So the school's really, really close. So that's it. That's all the access he's ever had to being alone. So very, very little chance of him being able to be kidnapped because I don't let him out of my sight. And that didn't used to be true. And it wasn't true for me. I went all kinds of places alone. This is just a phrase. I don't really like to read it. But Ted Bundy quoted this. So we're starting our actual serial killer notes here. That was all the preface prequel stuff. We're not going to go that much longer though today. So we serial killers are your sons. We are your husbands. We are everywhere. And there will be more of your children dead tomorrow. He said that. It's really messed up. And basically for Ted Bundy, he was, he killed them because he wanted to, because he liked it, because it made him feel like God, which is awful. But again, that's hinting you at the unit we're moving into. Okay. So they're very dark human beings. All right. So what is a serial killer? Let's at least define a little bit before we head off today. So the definition is they have to kill 2 or more people. The time span of more than 30 days. So they have to be killing for more than a 30-day period. If they killed Even if they killed 15 people, but it was all at once, like let's say a terrible event, like a mass school shooting, that's called a mass spree. So like that's a spree killing, that's a mass killing, that's not a serial killer. To be a serial killer, you have to have time in between the kills. The span has to be at least 30 days. So you have to be a killer for at least 30 days. Cooling off period between each murder, generally. So they kill someone, they wait a while, premeditate, plan, and then kill someone else. As opposed to mass murders, spree murders, which is just kind of like on a whim, and single homicides. So that none of those are a serial killer. Now, a general profile of a serial killer, so something that we've just developed over time of looking at the serial killers that we have, they generally are single, they generally are white, between 18 and 32. And again, not always, like we have other colors of people. We have people who were married. Just if I generalize them all, the most average serial killer has been single, white, 18 to 32, a victim of child abuse by a family member, usually has sexual motives. So they are usually a rapist or do things that are sexually motivated. McDonald triad. So this has been disproven. Definitely they don't all do this, but it still holds true in some cases, and some do all three. So bedwetting past the age of 10 or 12. So bedwetting to an abnormal age. And then pyromania or arson. So they like to set things on fire. Torture of animals, starting in their youth. So as a kid or a young teen. Sociopathic, not usually psychotic. So when we're talking about most serial killers, we're not really talking about they're just a psychotic person, they're having delusions and killing people. Now, some of them are, but most of them are more sociopathic or psychopathic, where they just don't have empathy. So they lack empathy, they lack guilt, and just don't think of people as being something to care about, so are more likely to hurt them. And they tend to collect trophies and souvenirs. So that'd be like our general profile. They don't all do that. They don't all fit that. But if I average them all together, that'd be a profile of a serial killer. So for killings are repetitive. They will continue until the predator is identified, apprehended, dies, or killed. So generally, if you have a set of series of murders, you're going to keep seeing it until you find them. Hasn't always been true. Some of them did stop for different reasons and then came back later, or took a very long period, or even just stopped entirely. A lot of them got too old and quit. But most of the time, you're going to keep seeing that repetition of killing until they're caught. Period between attacks decreases over time, and the trophy rush wears off. So a lot of times when you don't notice they're a serial killer because they're further apart in time, and then as they've been doing it for a while and getting away with it for a while, they start doing it more often, usually. For some demographics, just kind of, again, averages. Average age is 27, or almost 28, really. Males, 27.5 is the average age at first kill. 9 is the youngest. Robert Dale Segge, and 72 is the oldest. So our average age of when they first start killing people is 27. So a lot of times they guess that they're in their later 20s when they become a serial killer, because usually you start getting that kind of mental illness in your teens. And it takes a while from getting that mental illness originally to when you're really going to act upon it, usually. But still, he became a serial killer when he was 72, and this one was 9 when he started his killing spree. Jesse Pomeroy, Boston in the 1970s, killed 2 people and tortured 8 by the age of 14. So that's a weird case where he was much younger. Spent 58 years in solitary and confined until he died. So that's just sad. Just giving you an example. Now for a female killer, again, there's way less of them, but they do exist. 31 is the average age of their first kill. So usually a little older, taking them a little longer to get there. But 11 is youngest. This is the youngest female serial killer. And 66 was the oldest, Faye Copeland. If you notice, their names are the same. Ray Copeland, Faye Copeland, they were an older couple that just decided to be a serial killer in their old age. Then a couple more basic breakdowns. Rape, out of the serial killers that they looked at, 95 of them almost said, yes, there was rape involved, and 93 of them said no. So I guess I'm a little wrong. So it's about half and half. But again, even if there wasn't rape, a lot of times there was some kind of sexual weirdness. Type, organized versus disorganized. So that was what we should have got from the video yesterday. An organized killer, we're going to talk about in more detail tomorrow. But half and half. So about half of them are very organized, harder to catch, covering their tracks, planning meticulously, that kind of thing. And disorganized, just kind of pick a random house, go in and murder everyone. Method of killing, so bombing, more common than I would think, because I don't hear about that many bombs, I feel like. Strangling, common. Stabbing, gun, bludgeoning means hitting with something. Is that where I want to stop? Seems like a fairly good place. But I also have more to talk about. I'm going to stop there, though. All right. So we'll pause there. I'm going to continue on, get more into the nitty gritty. So that was basically like just like what is a serial killer and some facts about the United States trends. But then we're going to get into some like what are some psychology problems, some psychological issues they tend to have. How do we categorize them and that kind of thing.